Om Vasudeva Sutam Devam Kamsachanuramaddanam Devaki Paramanandam Krishno Vande Jagadgurum. Good evening, everyone. Welcome back to our Gita class. We had a bit of a hiatus because there was spring break last week. But unfortunately, it sounds like many of you didn't actually have fun during spring break because you were thinking about midterms. Anyway, something is better than nothing. So we're back, better than before. So last time, we got up to Shloka 65 of chapter 2, right? We're almost at the end of this very long chapter, but very interesting chapter. So let's look at Shloka 66 now. So please open the app as usual. Shloka 66 of chapter 2. Okay, I'm going to move this back a little. Are you guys there? Say yes when you are.
Yeah, I'm listening.
Oh, okay, you're going to listen. Okay. And Naman is there. Okay. So I'll repeat 1/4 and then you repeat, please. Nasti buddhi ayuktasya nacha yuktasya bhavana nacha bhavayatah shantihi ashantasya kutas sukham. Good. So let's look at the Anvaya, which means, one more time, I'll tell you, even though I say it every class, but anyway, for people who are coming for the first time, Anvaya means a rearrangement of the words in a shloka to make it more readily comprehensible. So what is Anvaya? Ayuktasya. For somebody who is ayukta, devoid of yoga, somebody who is not in yoga, not a yogi. Buddhihi na asti. There's no buddhi. Buddhi means different things in different contexts. Here, commentators in general take it to mean something like a spiritual intelligence, spiritual discrimination, a kind of wisdom, okay? Nacha ayuktasya, that same ayuktasya, that same person who is not yukta, what else happens? There's no bhavana for that person either. And bhavana has, this also is a term that can mean different things, but this is another one of those places where many of the commentators agree that it means something like meditation or concentration. So most commentators take this bhavana to mean concentration or meditation. Nacha abhavayataha, and for the person who is abhavayata, which means for the person who is not concentrated, who does not have a concentrated mind, or who is not in a state of meditation. Nacha abhavayataha, we're discussing Shloka 66 of chapter 2. Shantihi, there's no shanti for that person, no peace, peace of mind, peace of heart. Ashantasya, and for the person who has no peace, kutas sukham. Where will there be happiness for this? For some, if you don't have inner peace, then how can you possibly have happiness? Okay, now, this last statement is a very powerful one. Ashantasya kutas sukham. Without peace, how can you ever find happiness? It's a very profound statement. In fact, on a personal note, sometimes people ask me what made me become a monk. What was the first inspiration, something like that? When I was around 19, I read this edition of the Bhagavad Gita with Sri Aurobindo's translation and commentary. And at the time, I was not a very religious person in the traditional sense. I didn't necessarily believe in God. I was more agnostic. But the moment I read these kinds of statements, Ashanta Sukhuta Sukham, it resonated. You don't have to believe anything to recognize the truth of these statements. You can be an atheist and you still have to acknowledge, if you have any psychological understanding, any understanding of life, you'll know Ashantasi kuta sukham. Without peace of mind, I don't care how much money you have, how many sense enjoyments you indulge in, you will not be happy. Happiness will always elude you. So this is a very important statement. And one thing that's interesting about the shloka is remember the two shlokas earlier, which were 62 and 63, Dhyayato Vishan Pumsaha. There's a beautiful psychological chain reaction that happens. Something like that is happening here as well, at least according to a number of the commentators. And I think that they're probably right. But let's begin with Swami Tapasanandaji's. First of all, let me read his translation of this verse, and then I'll look at, he has a really nice little commentary on it, which I think is very practical and helpful. So this is Swami Tapasanandaji's translation of the shloka. A man of uncontrolled senses, that's this ayuktasya. The person who is not in yoga, he's translating as a person without sense control. A man of uncontrolled senses has no spiritual comprehension. Buddhi has no buddhi, spiritual comprehension. He has no capacity for meditation either, bhavana. For that person who is not able to control his senses, he has no meditation, he or she. For the unmeditative, there's no peace. Without meditation, no peace. And ultimately, and where is happiness for one without peace of mind? And his commentary, I really like. He says, so he's starting backwards. He's starting from the end of the shloka, and that's how he's explaining the sequence. He says, contrary to the popular view, sense control and not sense indulgence is the way to happiness. For true happiness can be had only on a basis of peace. So see how he's working backwards. Ashanta sukhuta sukham. You can only have happiness, which is the end of the shloka, by having peace. But you can only have peace through meditation on God or the Atman. That's bhavana at the end of the previous line, first line. But meditation is impossible without control of the senses. You have to be yukta. You have to be in yoga. Then he says, for sense indulgence strengthens the outward going tendencies of the mind and prevents the mind from getting ingathered and concentrated on the Atman, who is the source of all joy. So this one big question that comes up, especially in psychology these days, is a whole subfield devoted to this question. What's the field called? You know? There's a particular field within psychology all about the science of happiness. It's called positive psychology. The reason why they call it positive is because for hundreds of years, psychology has been focusing on the negative in a way. Really? I don't think. Yeah, no, I don't. I'm pretty used to earthquakes, but this didn't feel like an earthquake. Sorry, what was I just saying? Thank you. Normally, before the advent of this positive psychology movement in psychology, go back to Sigmund Freud and all of these famous psychologists. What are they doing? They're trying to make abnormal, neurotic people normal. That's their aim. Just bring them up to kind of a base level. Just be normal, because they're crazy. They want to make crazy people normal. Positive psychology is saying, okay, but what about normal people? What about them? Why are they neglected? Let's help normal people become better, more satisfied, happier, more fulfilled people. This is the idea behind positive psychology. It's become a huge field within psychology, and it's very important. You find lots of connections with spiritual life. There's a nice Coursera course that you can take online called the Science of Well-Being. Taught by a Yale professor called Laurie Santos. I recommend it. It's nice. I took it myself, and it's really, you learn a lot from it. Lots of practical tips and all these things. And there's one psychologist, I talk about him. I've talked about him before in some of these Gita classes. Martin Seligman. He's one of the most famous positive psychologists. He wrote a book called Authentic Happiness. And what does he say? He says that true happiness cannot be found just through sense gratification. And he's not a religious person at all, but he's saying the same thing as Bhagavan Krishna. But then he says, on the basis of empirical psychological studies, he found that the happiest people are the people who, first of all, identify what their signature strengths are. And secondly, find a calling in life that maximizes the utilization of those strengths. And does this remind us of anything in chapter 2 so far? Exactly. This idea of Bhagavan Krishna telling Arjuna, follow your swadharma, follow your swadharma. And your swadharma is to be a warrior and to fight in this just war, fighting for justice. And if you do that, you'll actually realize God. You'll attain it's not just you'll attain, in Indian philosophy, they have this like ihaloka and paraloka. You'll not only attain happiness in this life, but you'll attain happiness hereafter also, after you leave the physical body. So this Bhagavad Gita's concept of swadharma is extremely prescient, I think. This really anticipated some of the most modern thought currents in psychology and philosophy also. Okay. Another verse that I like, this is from the Mahabharata, about what is true happiness. It's from Shanti Parva. Shanti Parva is one of the most spiritual sections of the Mahabharata. It's full of spiritual wisdom. So this is one of my favorite verses. This is just for people who want to track it down. It's Shanti Parva 168.36. Yaccha kama sukham loke, yaccha divyam mahat sukham. Trishna akshaya sukhasyete narhata shodashim kalam. Has anyone heard this verse? If you calculate all of the happiness one can get from sense objects, as well as all of the higher forms of happiness experienced in heaven, this divyam mahatsukam, the even greater happiness you experience in heaven, all this happiness is not even 1/16. It's a very mathematically precise statement. All of this happiness combined is not even 1/16 of the joy derived from Trishna Kshaya Sukham, eliminating one's desires. It's a very interesting statement. It's a brilliant statement. The highest happiness is Trishna Kshaya Sukham. True happiness isn't Trishna Kshaya. The reduction and ultimately the elimination of desires. Why? What's the logic behind that?
Maybe because if you don't expect anything, you'll not have the worries of satisfying that particular desire.
Yeah, that's right.
At peace. And then
exactly. Every desire means you're not happy right now until you get that, whatever the object of that desire is. If I desire X, I'm not happy until I get X. If I desire X, Y, and Z, I'm not going to be happy until I get X, Y, and Z. And then the other problem with desire, it doesn't stop there. The problems don't stop there. They only start there. Because let's imagine I desire X. Let's say after a lot of difficulty, I get X. Am I finally happy? You tell me. Huh?
Going for the next thing.
Yeah.
That's the problem. Even when I get X, everybody thinks when I get X, then I'll be happy. But when they get X, you see what happens. They're not happy. They want X plus Y. Or they want X squared or X to the 10th. If it's money, usually I become a millionaire. And now I want $10 million because my friend's got a yacht. And I want a yacht. So there's another famous shloka which I've already repeated many times. So let's see if anyone remembers which one, which teaches the logic of desire. Why desire can never be satisfied through enjoyment. Huh? Yeah, that's right. What's the Sanskrit? For you Sanskrit experts out there. Na jatu kamaha kamanam upabhogena shamyati. Havisha krishnavatmeva bhuya eva vivadate. Najatu kama kamanam upavogena shamyati. You can never satisfy, extinguish, quench your desires, fulfill your desires through bhoga, upavogena. Rather, havisha krishnavatmeva. What happens if there's this giant fire? Imagine it's not even giant. It's a medium-sized fire. And you take ghee and you throw the ghee into the fire. What does happen? Does it get extinguished? No, it increases. And the reason why it's using this example is because some people stupidly think that by ghee is actually, if I throw ghee, it'll extinguish the fire. This is what most people think, worldly people think. I'm not saying people actually think ghee does that. I'm saying that People think this about sense pleasures. Yeah. I'll be happy as I just need to just get this one more thing. Everything is great in my life, but I just need X. And then everything will be perfect. Most people think like that. I can guarantee you, each one of you knows people like this. Maybe one of you is like that. I don't know. So, but it never happens that way. Never happens. What happens? The desires increase. I get X and then I want X squared, or I want X to the 10th. This is a truth in life. It's a hard truth. It's not a pleasant truth. But once you realize it, you have to change tack. You have to say, wait a minute, then my whole strategy for attaining happiness is completely wrong. Let me start from scratch and then begin spiritual life. Okay. So that's why this Ashanta Sukhuta Sukham is a wonderful statement. Now, just to give you some fun little commentarial details, you know I'm fond of them, at least. I don't know how fond you are of them. Shankara, he also gives a nice insight into Sukham. What is his definition of Sukham? Shankara says, freedom, Sukham. He starts with saying it's freedom of the senses from thirst for the enjoyment of objects. All of us have senses. There's nothing wrong with the sense organs. They're wonderful. They help us to see and to hear. You can read the scriptures, talk to people, talk to your guru, get instructions from your guru through your ears. Wonderful. The problem is raga and dvesha. These are the two things in Sanskrit, attraction and aversion. The moment that the sense organs are attracted or repulsed by sense objects, that's when the problems start. So Shankara says, true happiness is freedom of the senses, seeing, hearing, touching, etc., tasting, from thirst for enjoyment of sense objects, which is very much in line with the Shanti Parvan Shloka about Trishna Akshaya Sukham is the greatest of all happiness, the elimination of desires. It's also the fundamental teaching in these last few shlokas of the Bhagavad Gita, Sthita Prajna Lakshana. Again and again, Bhagavan Krishna is saying, what is the main characteristic of an enlightened soul, an illumined being? Sthita Prajna, that person who has completely eliminated all the desires in his or her heart, right? Ramanuja is very interesting, actually not just here, but for the remainder of this chapter. Remember that one crucial shloka, crucial especially for bhaktas, for commentators in bhakti schools of Vedanta who are interpreting the Gita. Why is 61 so important? Because it has this little phrase which is extraordinarily significant, matparaha, which means with your mind's intent on me, Bhagavan Krishna is telling Arjuna. So this is the slightest, the first mention of bhakti in the Bhagavad Gita is 2.61, matparaha. You should control your senses and think of me. Focus your mind on me, says Bhagavan Krishna. And Ramanuja says this is a momentous moment in the Bhagavad Gita. And what he does, whether you agree or disagree is another question altogether. But what he does is for the remainder of this chapter, and actually for all the subsequent chapters, he reads this matparaha into the subsequent shlokas. And he says, that's the presupposition of, that's the background, which you have to presuppose to understand shlokas 62 all the way up to 72. So bhakti is the foundation even for sense control. So now, with that as a background, let's get to his reading of 66, the one we're discussing now. What does he say? He says, what is this ayukta? This person who is ayukta, nasti buddhihi ayuktasya. The person who is ayukta, for that person, he or she will not have spiritual intelligence. But who is the ayukta? He's giving a different spin on this. Tapasanji says that person who lacks control of the senses. But what Ramanuja says is one who does not focus his mind on Bhagavan Krishna. Or it doesn't have Krishna, on God. The person who does not have his mind focused on God and Ramanuja adds, and tries to control his or her senses using just his or her own self-effort, purushakara. This is the ayukta person. Trying to control this person is not like a very worldly person, a very sincere spiritual aspirant, but who's not practicing bhakti. and trying to control the senses without the help of God. What happens to that person? No buddhi. And here Ramanuja says, what does buddhi mean here? This discrimination between the body-mind complex on the one hand, which is not our true self, and what is our true self, according to Ramanuja? Do you guys remember?
Soul, jiva.
The jivatman, exactly. The individual soul, the eternal soul in our hearts, which is separate from the body-mind complex. That buddhi does not arise in the person who does not have sense control and who does not rely on God and think of God. That's important. So this is the thing which is not actually in the verse, but you see how Ramanuja is kind of reading the matparaha into this verse also, and you'll see it in 67 also, and 68. 60. So that's something you have to keep in mind. This is Ramanuja's reading. Then he continues. That buddhi does not arise about our true nature as the eternal soul, separate from the body-mind complex. As a result of that lack of buddhi, what happens? That person fails in meditation on the self, on the jivatma, which is what he calls Jnana Yoga. The practice of Jnana Yoga for Ramanuja is meditation on the jivatman as separate from the body-mind complex. He's saying that person can't engage in Jnana Yoga properly. No bhavana. As a result of that lack of meditation, what happens? Desire for sense objects arises. And once you have a desire for sense objects, exactly what we were just talking about 5 minutes ago, what happens? We lose peace of mind. And finally, without peace of mind, no happiness. So this is also a very nice logical sequence. The only thing where I would say that one can raise doubts is this bhakti aspect of the verse, which Ramanuja is saying. He's reading the Matparaha from 61 into 66. I'm not saying it's wrong, but that's something for each of you to think about. But one thing strongly speaking in favor of his interpretation is that you just keep reading chapter 3, 4. Bhakti quickly becomes the keynote of the entire scripture, actually. So he's not wrong in recognizing the importance of bhakti and really focusing in on that matparaha, that phrase. You might be saying you might say that he's making too heavy weather of one small phrase. But that one small phrase blossoms into, basically, the whole climax of the Gita is sarvadharman parityajya mamekam. All you have to do is think of me and then surrender to me, and I'll take care of everything. I'll liberate you from all sins, chapter 18. So, yeah.
He says me.
Yeah.
Not, or who is that me?
Krishna. Me is Krishna. But what's the question exactly?
I mean, you can think of him as the form or the formless.
Both.
Or the one inside you, your own self.
So you'll find all of these conceptions of God in the Bhagavad Gita.
Yeah,
that's the beauty of the
saying,
Bhagavad Gita. Yeah.
It's not, it need not be like you worship a separate God, like Dvaita kind of.
No. But even one thing in defense of Dvaitavadins, because they always are sort of the butt of jokes, or somehow they come lowest on the hierarchy of things. But I think often they're misinterpreted and misunderstood because they're not actually studied. Dvaita Vedanta does not teach that God is somewhere up in the clouds. They also believe in God as Antaryami, within the heart, the inner controller, just as much as Ramanuja, just as much as any proper bhakti school. So we also should be careful about exactly but what you're saying is, we don't have to think about God as sort of like outside of us. That's certainly true. Ishvara, chapter 18, Ishvara sarva bhutanam hriddeshe jantishtati brahmayan sarvabhutani yantra arudhani maya. Ishvara is in the hearts of all creatures, says Bhagavan Krishna in chapter 18 at the end. So that concept is there. There are many. Anyway, but in answer to your question, you'll find that one of the wonderful things about the Gita is that it has a very, very broad conception of God. God is personal. Not just personal in the sense of being loving, omnipotent, omniscient, creating this entire world, responding to our prayers, listening to our prayers, all these things. God also incarnates as human beings, like Krishna, like Rama, but there's so many. Yada, yada, yada. So we'll get to that later in a later chapter. But God is also formless. You also find the formless God mentioned in the Bhagavad Gita. No form at all. And God is also impersonal. Akshara. The term akshara comes up in many places in the Gita. Often commentators interpret this to mean formless, immutable. So God is everything. You take your pick. Hindus have this beautiful concept of Ishta Devata, chosen deity. So it doesn't matter. And there's no higher and lower, at least on some tradition, according to some traditions of Hinduism. One I belong to, for instance, is non-hierarchical in that way. It's not, some other schools will have elaborate hierarchy saying God X is the best, God Y is a little lower, God Z is a little lower, I mean, it goes on and becomes really, really, yeah.
Just the phrase which we discussed right now. He says that meditation can only be done if you're spiritual, but
if you're spiritual,
that's what
this one is nacha ayuktasya bhavana.
So
if you're you need sense control to engage in meditation.
yes. Example, I can take my example. I also struggle to meditate because whenever I've tried, it's like either I have overflow of thoughts, or like I cannot close my eyes for a long time, or else I'll fall asleep if I'm tired.
Sure.
So that doesn't mean that I'm not trying to be spiritual or don't follow God or something.
No, but even Bhagavan Krishna is not saying that. Yeah. Right.
Does he mean people who cannot meditate? And sense over the control, because I think many might have a balance between having a sense over their control, even if it's not a complete balance. But I don't know how it is exactly linked to meditation.
Okay, so I think actually Tapasanaji explains this really nicely. So let me see. Meditation is impossible without control of the senses. For means because, right? Because why? Sense indulgence strengthens the outward going tendencies of the mind and prevents the mind from getting ingathered. That's the connection. The connection is that what is meditation but going inward and focusing on the inner spiritual truth, whether you think of that as God or as the Atman. But so long as you're concerned with external things, and it's not necessarily just sense pleasures, actually, that's a little bit too narrow. Any worldly attachment or preoccupation for its own sake, rather than if you connect it with God, that's a different thing. But there's a difference between obsessing about your child as just your child and see, even the word obsession that's part of the problem. Because are you meditating on your child or on God? Sometimes Ramakrishna would give advice to devotees who had children. He would say, I can't remember which devotee came and complained about it, but this devotee says, I can't help but think of my son. I'm constantly thinking about it. He said, then think of your son as Gopala. If you can even spiritualize that relationship, then that becomes another way of thinking about God. But you have to, that's an extra step though. You can't, So it's worldly attachments, worldly desires, and everything, anything that brings your mind outward. Does that make sense? But everybody struggles with meditation, so you're not alone. Start with a little bit. And don't do too much. This is one of the rookie mistakes that people make, is they start over enthusiastically and they say, I'm going to do 1 hour. I'm going to sit every day for 1 hour, every morning at 5 a.m. before I go to school or whatever. And you do it for 1 week, and then everything stops. It goes from hero to zero, 60 minutes to 0 minutes, and then no more meditation for the rest of your life. No. I've witnessed many a brahmachari in Belumat when I was, I joined the order in Belumat. There's what's called PPTC, Pre-Probationers Training Center. You join in Belumat as a young brahmachari, and you're put through all these courses. And it's like a military routine. Every minute of your day is accounted for. There's a Gita class, Gita memorization class. It would make the brahmacharis quake in fear, because you have to memorize, I think, 1 shloka every day, something like that. So 7 shlokas per week. There's no joke. And they would do it, but I just remember, because even when they're doing vegetable cutting, they've got a little pocket Gita and they're memorizing their Gita shlokas. But it's good, it keeps the mind high. But the thing I noticed is, after this, they do that for 1 year, this training. Then they're sent to a different center. What happens after they're posted to this other center? The moment they're sent to another center, they might have memorized some 400 shlokas, something like that. It's 1 year, imagine. All stops. I'm not saying in all cases, but in most cases. Why? Partly because, well, this is not directly related, but so because somebody's forcing them to do it. It's like a class with a teacher, and you'll get a scolding if you don't do it. And because it's mandatory. But now, by contrast, and I'm not bragging, but I didn't join in pre-probationary training center in Berlin, but I joined right next door in what's called Vivekananda University. And it's the opposite, no routine and no classes like that. But that meant that whatever I did because I wanted to do it, and I did it on my own. So I was memorizing Gita every day, some 3-4 slokas, without anybody breathing down my neck and forcing me to do it. And I managed to memorize not just one Gita, but the 6 Upanishads before my training center within 3 years. But that's because I had self-motivation. But another mistake that I often see brahmacharis making is when they want to memorize Gita, what they do is, they'll say, yes, I'll memorize 3 shlokas every day. And they do it for about 1 or 2 weeks. And then what happens? 3 to 0. So they might memorize 21 shlokas in 1 week or whatever, and then it's all gone. So no, better to do a small amount every day without fail. Because then your mind won't be able to play tricks. With 1 hour, or 3 slokas, you'll say, oh, I don't have the time for that. Oh, no, I have a midterm tomorrow. With 5 minutes, can you really make that excuse? Give me a break. So that's what I mean, 5 minutes, 10 minutes. That's why I'm saying even with meditation, you start slow. You start with this very small amount, literally 5 minutes. I have a friend, I don't want to call him a friend necessarily, somebody I'm friendly with in Germany. I just don't know him well enough. It's not that he's not a friend. It's just, I don't want to cheapen the word by calling everyone my friend. So anyway, this person, he was having migraine problems. And he went from one doctor to another, and he tried different kinds of medicine, prescription medicine, nothing's working. And then I guess I think somebody may have recommended a particular meditation app to him. He'd never tried meditation before. He's not a religious person. He's a German guy. And he does it, and lo and behold, that's what helped him with the migraine. And he swears by it. So I often think of meditation. Meditation is a kind of gateway drug into higher forms of spirituality. Many people come to meditation for all sorts of other reasons: stress relief, migraine relief, you're coming off a bad breakup, all sorts of reasons, right? But there's so many ways into, and then what happens is you'll say, wait, there must be something to this because it cured my headache. Now maybe there's something more to it. Maybe I should go back to, let me go to the sources. Let me go to the Gita. Let me go to Patanjali's Yoga Sutra and see what meditation is about. Let me go on a meditation retreat and see what all the big fuss is about. And it starts from there. Like they say, marijuana is a gateway drug to harder drugs. But even 5 minutes of meditation can be a gateway drug to longer meditation and ultimately spiritual fulfillment. That's the idea. Okay. Good. So that was all just Shloka 66. Okay, but he's got another question before we move on. So, okay, go ahead.
Ayuktasya means like incapable.
No. Here, yukta, it comes from the same root as yoga, actually. Yuj dhatu, verbal root. So that's why Sri Aurobindo translates it as in yoga, the person who is not in yoga.
Even bhavana is like feeling.
That again depends on the context. And so, and you came, I think, a little bit late. Or were you here when I was explaining that most commentators, I think you were just walking in when we talked about it. Most commentators take bhavana to mean either concentration or meditation. That's in this context. Yeah, let me read out to you one more time Tapasanaji's translation, because I think I read it out before you came. 66. A man of uncontrolled senses has no spiritual comprehension. So ayukta is the man of uncontrolled senses. Spiritual comprehension, buddhi. He has no capacity for meditation either, bhavana. For the unmeditative, there is no peace. And where is happiness for one without peace of mind? Okay. All right. We're moving on. Let's at least try to get through 2 shlokas today. Okay. 67. Indriyanam hicharatam yanmano anuvidhiyate tadasya harati pragyam vayuhu navam ivambhasi.
The sea.
Good. Anvaya, Ambasi, on an ocean. Where do we say we go into an ocean suddenly? On an ocean. This is an analogy. Ambasi, Navam. Imagine a ship on an ocean. Vayuhu iva. Vayu is wind. Just as wind will make a ship drift off course on a vast ocean. Charatam indriyanam, just so, the roving senses. Charatam means wandering, the wandering senses. Now here the anvaya itself, I think there's a mistake. I don't know why the anu is in between the yat and the manaha. It should be, I think, yat manaha anuvidhiyate.
That's all.
Mine is, is yours iPhone? It's not iPhone. I think this iPhone app has some real problems. Oh boy. Okay, thank you. I didn't know. So on the Android, it's actually showing up correctly. So it's yat manaha anuvidhiyate. Oh, exactly. I was wondering, I was crazy. Okay, so that mind, yat manaha, which anuvidhiyate follows what? The roving senses. So it's like the sense-oriented mind, that mind that's addicted to sense pleasures. What happens? Tat, that mind, asya pragyam harati. It steers way off course the pragya, the buddhi, the spiritual intelligence. Just as a strong wind will carry a ship off course on the ocean. Okay. Now, again, as I mentioned, Ramanuja, he's reading this Matparaha, this little hint of bhakti into all of these verses. So again, he says, this shloka is describing the calamity, the catastrophe, the spiritual catastrophe that befalls one who tries to control the senses without what? Without relying on God, without trying to think of God and calling on God, without praying to God. And if you recall, he interprets the shloka 62 and 63 in the same way. Dhyayato vishan pumsah sangasteshu bhujayate. That whole chain. Dwelling on sense objects leads to what? Attachment, sangha. From attachment comes, how well do you guys remember this? Kama. Kamat krodho vijayate, then anger. So this whole chain. But the whole thing starts with dwelling on sense objects. Why do you dwell on sense objects? Because you're not thinking of God. Okay. So that's Ramanuja's take on this. But this is one of those places where the app's commentary from Sri Aurobindo is not bad. So let's open the commentary. Oh yeah, well, you're not. So it's that, you know where it is, right? Second from the left. Okay. So here's Sri Aurobindo's commentary. I'm skipping the first sentence. Okay. Well, okay, no, let's read it. Evidently, there are two possibilities of the action of the intelligent will. Intelligent will is his translation of buddhi pragya. It may take its downward and outward orientation towards a discursive action of the perceptions and the will in the triple play of Prakriti. This is very sophisticated language. Okay, don't be intimidated. Okay, well, what does he mean? It means the mind will get caught up in this external world. I mean, put it in plain English. Okay. Prakriti means nature. The three gunas. The triple play is the three gunas. Sattva, Rajas, Tamas. Or it may take its upward and inward orientation towards a settled peace and equality in the calm and immutable purity of the conscious, silent soul, no longer subject to the distractions of nature. In the former alternative, what is the former alternative? The mind getting lost in outward things. In the former alternative, the subjective being is at the mercy of the objects of sense. You become a slave to sense objects. It lives in the outward contact of things. That life is the life of desire. For the senses excited by their objects create a restless or often violent disturbance, a strong or even headlong outward movement towards the seizure of these objects and their enjoyment, and they carry away the sense mind, quote, as the winds carry away a ship upon the sea. It's beautiful, actually, the English. Then he says, the mind subjected to the emotions, passions, longings, impulsions awakened by this outward movement of the senses carries away similarly the intelligent will, prajna, or buddhi, which loses therefore its power of calm discrimination and mastery. It's very beautiful, actually. Once you get a hang of his English, it's so wonderful. It's very elevating. Just from reading it, you can feel uplifted spiritually. Okay. Any questions about this one? No? Okay, good. So let's try to discuss the next one, 68. Tasmad yasya mahabaho nigrahitani sarvashaha indriyani indriyarthebhyah tasya prajna pratishtita. Good. Anvaya, tasmat, therefore, hey, oh, mahabaho, oh, you person, that you warrior with very buff arms, strong biceps. Nigrahi, oh, sorry, Anvaya, yasya indriyani, indriya arthebhyah sarvashah nigrihitani. Okay, tasya prajna pratishtha. Okay, so yasya, that person, for that person whose senses, indriyani, or indriya arthebhyah sarvashah nigrihitani, that person who's able to restrain his or her senses from sense objects, indriya arthebhyah, completely, sarvashah. Tasya prajna pratishtita. Only that person can be called a person of steady wisdom. It's just a synonym for sthita prajna. This is the prajna is pratishtita. It's the same thing. Now, Sridhara Swami has a funny, nice little comment on Mahabaho, a word which you think doesn't have much significance. It's one of the many names for Arjuna. He's a warrior, you call him Mahabaho. Sridhara says, no, Krishna is subtly poking Arjuna and saying, oh, mighty armed one, you're so mighty that you're able to conquer whole armies, but you can't conquer your senses? Poking him a little bit. Funny. So Sridhara has some nice comments. This is the one I like this one. Okay. And as usual, Ramanuja, just as he did with 66, 67, 62, 63, what does he say? You can guess it now. I'll read his Sanskrit here. It's beautiful. He's explaining this person, this yasya, this person who is successfully able to conquer his senses or her senses. Who is that person? Shubhashraye mai nivishta manasaha yasya. That yasya. What is it? Whose manasaha is nivishta, whose mind is completely merged in, sort of preoccupied with what? Mai, Bhagavan Krishna, God. Who is the Shubhashraye? Who is the source of all auspiciousness? So the bhakta, only that person can genuinely control the senses. Okay. Okay, well, let's do one more. 69, and then we'll do a short meditation. Okay. Well, unless you have questions on this one. No, it's more or less repeating the same thing that Krishna has been hammering over our heads for a while. So, but the next one is a very beautiful analogy. Ya nisha sarva bhutanam tasyam jagrati sanyami yasyam jagrati bhutani sanisha pashyato mune. Okay, Anvaya. Sarva bhutanam, of all creatures, ya nisha, that which is night to all creatures. Sanyami, for the self-controlled person, tasyam jagrati, That is like daylight for the self-controlled person. It's a very interesting analogy. That which is like night to worldly people. I mean, Sarvabhutanam here, it's implied that it's not everybody. It can't include the Sanyami. It has to exclude. So it's like opposites. Worldly people versus yogis, those with self-control. The very thing which is night to worldly people is daylight to self-controlled people, and vice versa. Yasyam bhutani jagrati, and that which is daylight for worldly people, pashyatah munehe sa nisha. That very thing is like night to pashyatah munehe, the sages who see God, basically, who are far-seeing, or pashyatah means literally somebody who sees, but not literally seeing. It means has a spiritual vision, basically, spiritual insight. Okay, so what is being said here? Think about this very simply. Spiritual, once you, even you're all students, right? I'm sure you know many people who have not gone on to do master's degrees. They're doing something completely different. Imagine somebody who's doing something completely different from you. Often when you think about what they do in their day-to-day lives, you'll find that there's almost no overlap with how you live your life. And even some of your childhood friends, I bet you have at least one childhood friend, and maybe if you see them now, you'll feel like, I can't believe that we were best friends when we were 5. Because now you live such different lives, you know? I'm not saying one is good or the other is bad. I'm just saying it's like that. It's like that, I'm saying. The idea is, for a spiritual aspirant, the very things which are like the essence of life, the highest values for worldly people, going to parties, and then, you know, like all the things that people normally do, and making money and this and that, it just becomes, it's like, what's the point of all this? Even at the level, you know, I'll just tell you in my own case, I listened to all sorts of music, popular music, when I was much younger. And then after becoming a monk, even when I tried to listen, it sounds somehow painful to me. And my whole musical taste has changed completely. Food, completely changed. And I can't eat the things that I used to eat. I used to love onion. I can't touch onion anymore. At least raw onion. It's like so smelly. And so the idea is, this is true for everyone to differing extents. And the more you evolve in your spiritual practice, the more you're going to find that you're not going to see eye to eye anymore with worldly people, and what makes them tick, what things they value. That's what this verse is about, really. That's the analogy. That which is daylight, what does it mean? It means those things which are most important for worldly people. It's as if they don't exist for spiritual aspirants. And those things which are most important for yogis and for spiritual aspirants, meditation and God and a peaceful life and sense control, those are considered to be either fantasy or stupid, or they're dismissed by worldly people. Why waste your time on, oh, you're such a talented person, why are you wasting your time on this stuff that's meant for retirees? I hear this a lot. They have no problem with my becoming a monk, but why'd you become a monk at the prime of your life? What a waste of a life. It's when you're 80 years old and your teeth are falling out, that's when you become a monk. When you become worthless to society. So, yeah.
To do with night or day?
It just means it's a metaphor, right? But so the questioner, I don't know how many online, whether people can hear the question, but I'll just repeat it. So she's asking, what does it have to? Why the day and night metaphors in the first place? It just means the things that we're most alert to, something like that. Do you see what I mean? Yeah? No, or you're not quite. So because night means it means I'm not aware of it. If there's a laptop and it's completely dark, am I aware of the laptop? I mean, I assume that that's the idea, though. So that's the idea behind night and day. It just means, you know, daylight, I'm aware of these things.
And the world is very essential things which all your senses or something.
Yeah.
That's why it's more important to people who...
Yeah. You know what? Maybe part of the thing is because my translation is not as good as it could be. Think about it as waking and sleep. Like, so when you're awake, it means you're attentive to certain things, right? So the metaphor would be worldly people are most awake to worldly values, whereas yogis are most awake to what? Spiritual values. And they're just complete opposites. Every great saint has said this. Jesus taught you can choose God or mammon, but not both. God, everybody knows what God is, but what is mammon? Do you know? It's an old English word.
Yeah, meat.
Meat? No. That's interesting. So Jesus was a vegetarian, I guess. No, I don't think he was a vegetarian. Mammon here stands in for, it actually means money, but it means more generally worldly values. You can choose God or worldliness, but never both. Kathopanishad makes a similar statement using different words. I'm looking at you, but anybody. They're two beautiful Sanskrit terms, which are also opposites. They're two paths which confront every human being. Ah, good. He comes through in the end. Shreya and Preya. Shreyascha Preyascha Manushyametastav Sampariti Vivinakti Dhiraha. Two paths confront every human being. The path of Shreya, the path of perfection, spiritual perfection. And the path of Preya, which is the path of enjoyment. This is Swami Vivekananda's translation. I like his translation more than anyone else's. It's very nice. Two paths, path of perfection or the path of enjoyment. Each of us has to make a choice. The dhiraha, the intelligent, the wise person is the one who's able to distinguish between these two paths. This is where most of us get stuck. You know why we get stuck? Because we mistake Preya for Shreya. This is extremely common in day-to-day life. What's a simple example? We feel lust, we call it love. Very, very common. Most human beings on this earth mistake lust for love. They cover dung with roses. And they don't want to admit it. They get very upset if you point that out. What? No, it's not lust. Lust is for animals. And then they'll start saying these grand things about the same old lust, but with much fancier words. So the first thing you have to do in spiritual life is you have to wisely separate the path of enjoyment from the path of perfection and don't deceive yourself anymore. Enough of all this self-deception. I've come back again and again because of all this self-deception. Enough. Let me be honest with myself. Then, Shreyo hi dhirobi preyaso vrinite, preyo mando yogakshemat vrinite. Shreyo hi dhirobi preyaso vrinite. Oh yeah. So the intelligent person is the one who then, after discriminating between these two paths, chooses the path of, obviously, of Shreya. And the foolish people are the ones who choose the path of enjoyment. Why? Yogakshema. Here, there are different interpretations. But Yogakshema, I think Shankara, for instance, interprets it to mean, Kshema means tending to something. It means maintaining what we already have, our possession, our dear possessions. That's what becomes a source of anxiety. That's why the more things you own, the more worried you become, because then you have to actually maintain the Lexus, and then if I have a Rolex and I'm afraid of people stealing it, or the yacht. And yoga means things that you don't yet have, but that you want. I want that yacht because my friend's got a yacht. That means I have to have a yacht. Yoga kshema. For those reasons, you go on the path of enjoyment and you get caught. And you have to come back again and again, and you'll never achieve happiness that way. So again, I say all this, why? Shreya versus Preya, God versus Mammon, Nisha, and so night and day. The world, what is daylight for worldly people is nighttime for spiritual aspirants. That's the point. These are opposite values, actually, if you're honest with yourself. None of this bhoga yoga combination nonsense. Be honest. Right now you want to do bhoga, but don't do bhoga and call it yoga, because you'll be short-circuiting all spiritual progress. Let's end on that note, and we'll do a brief meditation now. Sit in a comfortable posture, what's called Sukhasana in Patanjali's yoga philosophy. Close your eyes. Breathe in slowly. Take a deep exhale. Now try to be aware of your breath as you inhale and exhale. And to just concentrate your mind, you can focus your mind on the tips of your nostrils, where you feel the breath coming in and out. If your mind gets distracted from the breath, gently bring your mind back to the breath. Gently open your eyes. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Hari Om Tat Sat.